Well, hey there, traveler, and welcome back to the GameDev Tavern. Grab a seat and join us while we create some awesome little games. My name is Nicholas, and this is episode 8 of the tutorial series where we create a beat-em-up game from scratch in Godot. Alright, so in the last episode, we set up the knife weapon as part of the existing character scenes. And so next we'll need to create a new scene for those collectible objects that can spawn in the game and be thrown by characters. So let's go ahead and click on plus to create a new scene. And as usual, whenever we create a new scene, we'll need to think a little bit about what type of node to use. So these collectibles won't be doing any collision with other bodies in the game, but we will still need to check if we are overlapping with existing bodies. So here we are going to use an area 2D. Let's go ahead and rename this collectible and save. We'll hop over into scenes and let's go into props and save this. So you'll see that a lot of the logic for collectibles is going to be shared between the knife, the gun, and the food objects. So similar to how we build our characters, we will be creating a base class here that other objects will inherit from. And while this shows the power of inheritance, you'll also discover the limitations of that model, because a lot of the code that we're going to be writing here in the collectible scene is code that we've already written for the barrel and for the characters. However, the objects differ way too much in terms of behavior, so they cannot really share a common parent, and only a limited amount of code can be shared. So this is where you'll hear about a different type of architecture by which to organize your game, which is called composition. And there's pros and cons to both approaches, and perhaps in a future tutorial, we'll focus more on building a game using the composition model. So for now, let's go ahead and add a couple of components we will be needing for all of our collectibles. So we'll know that every area 2D needs a collision shape, so let's go ahead and add that. And we won't be defining the shape as part of the parent object, we'll be defining it as part of the inherited scenes. Let's go back to the root scene, Control A, and let's go ahead and add a sprite. We'll have two sprites here, one for the collectible and one for the shadow. And typically every time we have objects that have some height in the game, because we're faking a 3D view, it's always good to have a shadow on the ground. It just gives that impression that there is actual height. So let's call this shadow sprite. And then next, our collectibles will also have multiple states. They will be falling to the ground, they'll be flying across the level, and they will be idle on the ground, ready to be picked up. So we will need an animation player to have various animations depending on the state on which they're in. Finally, once they are flying, those collectibles will emit some damage. So let's go ahead and add a damage emitter, Control Shift A, to instantiate a child scene, and we're going to pick a damage emitter here. Also, let's uncheck both of those, monitoring and monitorable, and again, we'll set these as part of the children. Let's create a new layer for our collectibles, so project settings. Let's hop over to 2D physics, and let's create a new layer here for collectibles. This is going to be layer number 9. So we'll place it on the layer number 9, and we will be detecting the player bodies and the enemy bodies. And we won't impact the destructibles. So here we should be okay. Control S, and let's go ahead and create a script. Leave it in the same folder. And there's a couple of things. First of all, let's give this a name. Then we will have various states. So let's go ahead and create another enum for states. And here we will have the fall state when it spawns. We will have the grounded state when it's lying on the ground, and the fly state when it's flying across the level. Next, we will be building an animation dictionary. So similar to what we did for the character, let's go ahead and create an anim map. And for each of the states, we'll be creating various animations. We'll have the fall animation, the grounded animation, and the fly animation. Okay, similarly, this will have to gain some height. So let's give it a height as a float and a height speed. And because it will be flying up in the air, we'll also need to define a gravity. Let's give it an initial state. Let's provide a exported variable to figure out the speed at which you'll be flying. Okay, with that set up, we'll go ahead and get started by inheriting that scene to create our knife. So go to Scene, New Inherited Scene. Let's use the collectible, and let's go ahead and rename this Knife. Go ahead and save it in the same folder. Hop into our 2D view, and we'll start adding our sprite and adding our animations. So the collectible sprite here will be the knife sprite. So if you look in your art folder, you can filter at the top by the name knife, and we'll want to take the prop, hop over and drag it into the texture. So like usual, we'll want to remove the offset and set it ourselves, and I believe this is -8, -8. Let's also add our shadow, except the shadow is something that is common across all collectibles. So let's hop back over into the parent scene, shadow sprite, and here in the art folder, look for a prop shadow. Just go ahead and drag this into the texture up there. Let's make sure it's not centered by default, and we'll go ahead and bring it -3 and -1. All right, let's hop back over into our knife scene and we will start creating our animations. So there's 3 animations. The first one is fall. So this is when the object gets spawned and we will have it just rotate. So for the rotation, we'll just make this 0.2 seconds long and we'll have the snap be at 0.05. Let's zoom in a bit. And we will be creating 4 keyframes and rotating the sprite during those keyframes. So let's start with the first frame, hop over into the transform, and let's have a keyframe for rotation at 0. Hop over into 0.05 seconds, and let's type 90. Then another one at 0.1. So we enter 180 degrees, and lastly, 270 degrees. All right, this is an animation that loops, and we'll make it the first animation by default. If you go ahead and play it, you will see that it actually does a full rotation, which is not something that we want. So we want to actually make it discrete. That way we actually only see the frames of the game. This is really an artistic choice, but given the fact that we're making a pixel art game that mimics the older games from the NES era, this is typically how they would do the games. Next, let's make a new animation for when the object is grounded. This is going to be a single frame, 0.1, which will loop, set the snap to 0.1, and we will actually make this as if it's stuck on the ground. So let's set the rotation to 90 degrees, add a keyframe, and we will also bring the sprite up by 8 pixels. So -8, there we go. Let's insert a keyframe here. Okay, and finally we'll have a last animation for flying. So create new, fly. This is also an animation that takes 0.1 and it's going to loop, hop on the first frame, and we'll want to reset these and have a keyframe on the position. Next, let's go ahead and create a shape to detect the various objects. So go to the collision shape, add new rectangle shape. Let's bring this up a little bit. Okay, back into the code, we'll need to start handling the various states. So let's go ahead and have a function process. And here we will handle the fall state. Let's make sure we are in the right state. Okay, so what happens when we are falling? Well, we'll do exactly the same thing as what we did with the barrel. Let's hop over into the barrel scene and we can grab exactly this code here. Okay, we'll need the delta variable. Let's go ahead and pass this. All right, and when we have a height of 0, we'll just want to set the state to grounded. Next up, we'll want to handle the animations. And here we will just have the animation player play the state that we currently have, which means we'll need a reference to the animation player. Hop back over to the top of the script and let's create some unready variables. Okay, and we are ready to play the animation from our dictionary. All right, and when we start the game, we will want to set the height speed to initial knockdown intensity. And let's go ahead and have another exported function for this. Make this a float. And we'll start this here. Finally, as with every object that has some height, we'll want to make sure that the sprite representing the image actually goes up in position. So for that, we'll need a reference to our collectible sprite. Hop over to the top, create a new onReady variable to have a reference to it. Collectible sprite. This is a sprite 2D. And okay, and let's set the position every frame. Nice height. Okay, let's set some of those properties by default. So for the collectible, the knockdown intensity, let's try 120. And for the speed, let's try 100. Okay, we'll see if we need to fine tune this. We can try this right away. Let's hop over into the world scene, hop into the 2D view, and as part of our actors container, Control-Shift-A to instantiate it. Type knife, and let's go ahead and place it right by the player, and F5 to start the game. Okay, this is looking pretty good. So basically, whenever we instantiate a knife, it will just spawn, start spinning around, fall on the ground, and be available for the player to be detected. So this is what we'll be working on next. If the character does not have a knife and is overlapping with the detection area, then we'll allow the player to pick it up upon attack. All right, so for the characters to be able to pick up the weapons on the ground, we'll need to have a new area 2D to detect the overlap with that region. So let's hop back over into the character scene and Control-A to add a new node. Let's pick an area 2D, and let's call this a collectible sensor. This will need a collision shape. Let's go ahead and add it, Control-A. And we won't be setting this as part of the scene, we'll be setting it as part of the inherited scene. Let's do that right away. Hop over into the player scene, and in the collision shape, let's go ahead and create a new rectangle shape. We'll make this one quite tiny. Let's go 2 by 2. Let's make it 3 by 3. A little bit generous. Okay, and then back into the sensor itself. Let's set, we don't want any of this in the parent, so hop back over into the character scene and make sure to reset these layers. And then back in the player scene, here we'll be setting a mask for the collectibles. Okay, so next up, we are going to be introducing a new state where the characters are going to kneel to grab whatever is on the ground. Hop over into the animation player and let's go ahead and create animation. Let's call this one pickup. This will be a single frame animation 0.1. It won't be looped. Let's set the snap to 0.1. And then we'll add a keyframe for the character sprite. I believe it's frame 60. Now, if we were to set the knife sprite to 60 as well, you can see that there is actually a sprite here. And this is because when the player has a knife and is jumping and he's landing, we do want to still display the knife. But in this specific case, when we're picking up an object, we won't be able to have an object on hand. So let's actually create a different frame. We'll set frame 66, for example, which is empty. That way we make sure that when we're picking up an object, we're not displaying anything for the knife sprite. Okay, we'll want a callback function, which we haven't created yet. This is going to be a special function where we'll be picking up the collectible. So let's hop over into the script. Into the character script, we introduced a new state. So let's hop over into our list of states. Let's call in this pickup. Let's go ahead and create our callback function. Here we'll set the state to idle, but we'll also want to perform the pickup. So we haven't actually written the code for this yet, but we will do that in just a second. So pickup collectible. So we'll need a reference to the collectible sensor to see when we're trying to pick up something, whether there is an overlapping area. So let's add an unready variable. Okay, and let's bring this right here. Okay, and next up, let's create a couple of new functions to see if there's something to pick up and to actually do the pickup itself. So let's scroll down and let's go to there we go. All right, can pickup collectible. So basically what this is going to do is it's going to check whether the sensor area 2D has an overlapping area. And because we're only monitoring for the collectibles area, if there is an overlapping area, then we know that there's something that can be picked up. We'll also have additional logic because if there is a knife to be picked up, but the player already has a knife, or down the line, if there is a food item and the player already has maximum health, we won't allow the pickup. So there's going to be additional logic here. We'll just write this in the simplest way for now, and then we'll add it a little bit more down the line. So first we want to find out what are all of the possible collectibles that the player can get. Get overlapping areas. Okay, let's actually return. So if there is nothing, we'll just return false here. That allows us to just write the code underneath. So then let's go ahead and pick it up and we'll check what type of collectible it is. So we'll pick the first one, and here we'll want to add a new enum to our collectibles to see what type of collectible it is, to add a little bit more logic. So let's hop over into the collectible class and hop over at the top, and here we'll add a new enum. Let's call this type. This is either going to be a knife or a gun or some food. And let's add a variable to keep track of this. Type dot, by default we'll make it a knife. And let's make this an exported variable instead. Okay, so by default, this is a knife. All right, so now let's go back into the character scripts. And here we will check what type of collectible it is. So if collectible.type is a knife and we don't have a knife, we'll return true. We'll have other cases down the line when we introduce the gun and the food item. For now, let's just return false if for all of the other conditions. Okay, well, lastly, we'll introduce another function to actually pick up the collectible. This won't return anything. We'll check if we can actually pick it up. And if we can pick it up, let's go ahead and get the overlapping areas, get the collectible. So we know that there's at least one, otherwise we wouldn't be able to pick it up. And we know that if we have a type knife, then we should be able to pick it up here. So in this case, has knife equals true, and we'll also free the collectible. This will remove it from the scene. Now, what we need to do is within the player scene, whenever we're trying an attack, first let's check if there's something to pick up. If can pick up collectible. then we'll actually do a pickup instead of an attack. So let's bring this increment it by one way. All right, so if we can pick up a collectible, meaning that there's something to pick up, we're moving to the pickup state. We're going to execute the animation, and after the animation is complete, oh, I think we forgot. Let's hop back into the player, animation player, and here at the end of this frame, let's insert a new track, call method on the player, right click to insert a key, and we want to pick the on pickup complete. There we go. So after this animation is completed, we're going to pick up the item, hop over into the on pickup complete, which is going to be right here. And not only do we want to set the state to idle, but we also want to pick up the collectible. So let's go ahead and try this out. Okay, first we're going to get rid of our knife, and now we'll try to pick it up, and it's not picking it up. Okay, well, this is actually going to be a good example to show you how to debug these kind of problems. This is going to be very common, and there's a couple of things to do, and I think it's going to be a good illustration of the type of things you can do when you have problem with figuring out collisions. So the first thing I like to do is just to enable the collision shapes, just to make sure that they do exist and that they properly overlap. So here you can see that we do have a shape set up for the player here, and we have a shape for the knife. So the areas actually exist and they do overlap. Next thing we want to do is to add a breakpoint to see what is going on. So we never get into this state. So the problem is happening before we do the pickup animation. So let's try to see if we can pick up a collectible here. In Godot, you can set a breakpoint, which will stop the execution of the program at a specific point in your code, in which you can inspect the various contents of the variable. So I'll go ahead and press F5 once again. And once I go towards the knife, if I press the attack key, it's going to stop here at this breakpoint. So we do go through this path, and here we'll want to go one line at a time to see the contents of the variable. So here on the right-hand side, you can see an inspector, which contains all of the existing variables and the contents. Let's move over to the next line. We can do this by stepping over. And here we can see that the collectible areas is an array of size 0, when we would actually expect that to be an array of size 1. So there's something wrong with being able to get the overlapping areas. So we know that the areas exist and they have the right collision shapes. So the next thing is either they don't have the right mask and collision layer set up, or they're just not being monitored properly. So let's go ahead and stop the code here, and we'll go ahead and inspect that right away. Let's hop over into our knife and look at the collision layer. So it is properly set on the collision layer called collectibles. And so let's hop over into our player and make sure that the sensor is looking for collisions with that layer. So the collision layers are set properly. So let's just make sure that everything is being monitored properly. This sensor should be monitoring. We don't care about it being monitorable. And let's hop over into the knife. And the knife here is not monitorable. So this is the problem, meaning that it's not possible to look at overlapping areas when it's not monitorable. So let's go ahead and set this to true, but actually we don't want that to be true all the time. So let me hop over into the 2D view. So this object here is both going to be spawned or it's going to be thrown across the board. We only want the ability to be picked up when it is in the grounded state. So this is actually correct for 2 of the 3 states. And so the way that we can fix this is by going to the animation. Let's hop over into the grounded, and this is where we'll want to set the monitorable to true. At a keyframe, we'll want to set it to false in the other states. So let's hop over into the other 2 animations. We'll set this to false. And by default, in the reset track, we'll also want this to be false. Okay, let's try this again. We can actually get rid of the visible collision shapes. So here we're getting rid of the knife, and when I go towards it, oh, we forgot to remove the breakpoint. Let's see if this works now. So let's go to the next line. And now we can see that the area has a size 1. So it's been able to detect the proper collectible. Let's go ahead and remove the breakpoint, and we'll just go through the entire code at a time. So press F5 and we'll get rid of the knife. And now when we hop over it, we pick it up. Then we throw it. So this is working properly. And as you can see, debugging through Godot is actually extremely easy thanks to the ability to set up breakpoints, inspect the contents of the variables, and the problems you'll have with area 2Ds and collision shapes and so forth. It always comes down to checking 2 or 3 things, so it's pretty trivial to fix. Okay, so let's now take care of our enemies and make it fair for them to be able to pick up weapons as well. So here I think it's a good time to introduce a new type of enemy, since the first type of enemy we introduced was mostly a melee. So let's hop over into scene and let's create a new inherited scene. And this time we will be keying in characters our basic enemy. Okay, and let's go ahead and rename this Goon enemy. And enter, go ahead and save. We'll save it in the same spot. Hop over into our 2D view. And here we will be changing the character sprite. Hop over into your library and look for the enemy Goon and drag this over to the character sprite. And you can see that instantly we just created a different enemy. All of the animations are the same because the sprite sheets are the same, it's just the graphics are slightly different. We'll go ahead and set a different sort of properties for this guy. So can respawn knives, we'll set that to true. And damage, we'll set that to 1. Duration grounded, let's keep that. Let's actually make this 700, so it'll be faster for them to get up. Duration between knife respawns, let's set this to 1000. Flight speed, let's have them go a little bit faster when they're ejected. Has knife, they will spawn with a knife. And then knockdown intensity, let's keep that to 10. Let's make this 80. And max health, let's make these a little bit lighter, so there'll be a light version. That's why they don't go melee with the characters. Speed will make it a little bit faster. All right, so when they do spawn, they will have knives and they can respawn knives. We can actually test that right away. So let's back over into the world scene and we can instantiate, so from the actors container, a Goon enemy. We'll go ahead and drag this person down. Let's bring him down here. And the basic enemy, let's bring him a little bit closer. We will remove the ability to respawn knives. Okay, so let's go ahead and press F5. We should now have 2 different behaviors, one who's coming head to head and the other one who is not moving. And the reason why it's not moving is because we haven't set a player reference. So every time we'll add enemies to our actors container, we'll need to assign a player. So we'll be doing this through the code down the line. Okay, and so we can see the behavior there, which is correct. The first one is trying to attack us. The other one is throwing knives. So this is working correctly. One thing we'll do is whenever an enemy hops over a knife that's available for pickup, we'll have the enemy actually pick up the knife. The other behavior that we will introduce is that anyone who can respawn knives, as soon as they get hit once, they won't have the ability to respawn knives anymore. So they'll still have the ability to pick up a knife, but they lose the ability to just have unlimited knives. And this will just create a little bit more dynamic in the gameplay mechanism. So let's go ahead and do this. First of all, let's make sure that if you get hit, you cannot respawn knives. So let's hop over into the on receive damage. So if we can get hurt, and let's make sure that we cannot respawn knives. Okay, next we will need to set up the pickup animation for the enemies. So back over into the basic enemy 2D view, animation player. Let's create a new animation, call that pickup. Similarly to the player, this is going to be a single frame animation. Set the snap to 0.1. And let's go ahead and select the character sprite, hop over to frame 70 and create a keyframe. We'll want to do the same thing with the knife sprite, but similarly, we'll want to make sure that there is no image here, which is correct. So go ahead and create a keyframe. And at the end of the pickup, we'll want to call the callback function on pickup complete. So right click, insert a keyframe, and hop over to the on pickup complete. Next, we will want to add a collision shape for our sensor. So let's make this a rectangle. Similarly to the player, we'll make this 3 by 3, so it's pretty small. And let's make sure we are looking at the right layer, so we are looking for collectibles. Okay, and now we just need to insert the logic, which is when the enemy is hopping over something that can be picked up, the enemy will go ahead and pick it up. So let's hop over into the script, into our basic enemy script. And here, when we are moving towards our melee position, which means we don't have anything, and we're going towards it, let's just see if we can pick up an item, and if we can, then we'll move over to automatically to the range position. So if can pick up collectible, then state equals state.pickup. Actually, what we'll do as well is, since we're picking up something and we're going to go range, let's make sure we haven't reserved any slot, and if we did, then we'll go ahead and free it up. So if player slot is different than null, then we'll free the slot, which is something that we do here. And because we're freeing the slot here, we want to make sure we don't reserve it right after. So this is going to be an else if state. So if we can pick up a collectible, we pick it up, then we go into the range position. Otherwise, we try to reserve a slot and then try to go melee. The last thing we'll want to fix is up here, there is now a possibility of having a knife without being able to respawn a knife. And so here, both cases are valid. So if we have a knife because we've just picked it up, or if we're able to respawn knives, then we'll want to go to the range position. So we're going to save and try this out. So there's two things we'll want to try out. First, this enemy here, the melee enemy, should be able to pick up the weapon. Okay, perfect. And go into the range position, throw the knife, and then come back in the melee position. The second thing we'll want to make sure is that this guy over there, it's going pretty fast, should not be able to respawn knives when he gets hit. Okay, and that's the case. Great, so now we have two different types of enemies that have different behaviors, and this is starting to make the gameplay quite fun. Well, here we are at the end of yet another episode. Today we created collectible objects which will be used for weapons and other perks alike. We then allowed both players and enemies to pick those up for more variety in the gameplay. We also walked through a quick debugging session, which might come handy down the line. Well, hopefully everything made sense to you, but if you do have any questions or concerns, please holler in the comment section below and I'll do my best to respond quickly. You're a hero for going this far in the tutorial. This game is really starting to shape up. If you do like what you're making, please support the channel using the like and subscribe buttons, and once I reach 1,000 subs, I'll have you pick the nature of the next tutorial series. Time to take a quick break, and I'll see you in the next episode. Cheers!